They say some villages are born under a curse, not by accident, but by ritual, bound by blood, sealed in silence. Here, beneath the mist-choked mountains and rotting banyan trees, time doesn't flow, it coils. Ancestors whisper through cracked walls, dolls blink when no one is watching, and brides are married to the dead so the living may survive. Welcome to FolkFear, a channel that dares to open the coffins of ancient Asia's most terrifying village legends, forgotten rites, and cursed bloodlines. These are not just stories, they are warnings etched in red thread, paper talismans, and bone ash. Tonight, we bring you a tale buried for generations. A girl returned to a place where brides never leave, where spirits wait in lacquered dolls, and where the only way to break the curse is to become part of it. This is the blood wedding of Willow Hollow. The road to Willow Hollow had always been narrow, a thread of cracked stone that coiled like a serpent through the fog-soaked mountains of southern China. It was not a place easily found on maps, nor one spoken of openly. The village existed more in whispers than in records, its name passed from lip to lip like a secret best forgotten. Liang Shu hadn't seen it in 17 years. Now, she was coming back alone. Her father was dead. The bus had dropped her off miles away, refusing to enter the path that led into the hollow. The driver, an old man with shaking hands and wide, fearful eyes, had simply gestured toward the mist and muttered, "You shouldn't go there after sunset. Some places, remember." She walked. Each step toward her ancestral home felt like walking deeper into memory or madness. The trees leaned in too close, their gnarled limbs whispering dry secrets. Moths clung to her coat. The air was thick with something she couldn't name. Not decay exactly, but something older, heavier, like incense clinging to forgotten bones. Her luggage dragged behind her, its wheels stuttering over stones and roots. She didn't stop. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Willow Hollow waited. It emerged not suddenly, but gradually, a series of cracked roof tiles peeking through low mist, half-hidden shrines wrapped in paper talismans, and a single blood-colored lantern swaying at the edge of the stone gate. A wooden archway stood where the path narrowed, its carvings faded but still legible. Blessed are those who remember their dead. The village beyond was smaller than she remembered. Time had not been kind to it. The once bustling square was now empty, save for a single wooden cart with a broken wheel. Homes leaned with age. Windows were shuttered, not out of protection, but fear. Even the crows were silent. As Shu stepped past the gate, a sound echoed faintly from the distance. A low, melodic chime, like bells swaying in the wind, but the air was still. She paused, then kept walking. The Liang ancestral home sat at the farthest edge of the village, perched on a slope where the trees grew too thick and the shadows stretched too far. The manor was older than anyone alive, a crooked fusion of dark wood, red lattice, and stone. Red paper from long past festivals still clung to the beams, faded to pink and peeling. She had barely opened the gate when the smell hit her. Not rot, not death. It was mugwort, burnt and bitter, a cleansing herb often used in Taoist rituals to ward off restless spirits. The threshold of the house was lined with salt and millet, scattered like someone had performed a ritual in haste. A faded bowl of rice wine sat just beyond the door, long evaporated. She hesitated. This was her home, yet something in the air warned her, you are not the only one who returned. Still, she crossed the threshold. Inside it was dim. The wooden floors creaked like old bones beneath her weight. Dust lay thick on every surface. The air felt still, too still. She reached for the light switch, but of course there was none. Willow Hollow had never fully modernized. Oil lamps and flickering candles still held dominion here. The walls were lined with ancestral portraits, faded ink paintings of stern-eyed women and solemn men. Each one stared down at her with the same expressionless gaze. At the end of the hallway hung her father's portrait. The paint was still wet. Someone had placed a bowl of white rice and 2 sticks of incense beneath it. The ash was still warm, but no one was there. That night, Shu slept in the room she had grown up in, or tried to. The bed was hard, the air damp, and her childhood things had all been boxed away. Only one item remained, a doll. It sat neatly on her bedside table. It was old, lacquered, with jade eyes that gleamed even in the dark. Its silk dress was red, ceremonial red, and its hands were folded in its lap, as if in prayer. She had forgotten its name, hadn't even remembered leaving it behind. And yet, there it was, pristine, waiting. When she closed her eyes, she could still feel its eyes on her. She dreamed of the willow tree. It stood tall in the village square, though it had long since been cut down in waking life. In the dream, it was whole, wide-branched, swaying gently even without wind. Beneath it stood a woman in a red wedding dress, her face obscured by a heavy crimson veil. She was sobbing. Each tear that hit the soil bloomed into black lilies. Each sob echoed like bells underwater. She reached toward her, but the bride turned, slowly, unnaturally, and raised her hands. In one hand, she held a comb of ivory. In the other, a lock of hair. Her own hair. Shu woke in a cold sweat. The doll had fallen from the table and now lay face up on the floor. Its hands were no longer folded. The next morning, the village was awake, if such a thing could be said to it. A few elders sat outside, peeling lotus seeds in silence. Children were nowhere to be seen. Doors opened only a crack. Eyes peered out wary and wide. When Shu greeted them, most said nothing. One old woman, face leathery with age, lips stained from betel nut, approached her without a word. She pressed a red thread into her palm. "For protection," she rasped. Shu opened her mouth to ask, but the woman had already hobbled away. Later that day, she visited the village shrine, or what remained of it. The stone statues had all been broken. The offering table was blackened by fire. Charred paper offerings still littered the ground, their ghostly messages half legible. Protect her soul. Bind the union. Let no bride walk alone. Behind the shrine, someone had carved characters into the stone wall. Buyao Chu Ta. Ta Iching Shuyi Ling Igarenla. Do not marry her. She already belongs to someone else. She didn't know who it referred to, but she felt the answer watching her from somewhere behind her spine. By dusk, a fog had rolled in, swallowing the village whole. Shu sat on the back steps of the manor, staring at the garden that had long gone wild. Her father's funeral would be held in 3 days, according to the Ghost Festival calendar, as per village tradition. No one had offered to help. No one even asked about the arrangements, as if it had already been decided.
She took out the doll and studied it again. Its eyes were not glass, they were jade, cool to the touch and too real. A faint red thread had been tied around its waist, frayed and knotted. Its robe was sewn shut, but something shifted inside when she tilted it. She turned it upside down. Something fell out. A tooth, a child's tooth. That night she could not sleep, not because of the dreams or the doll or the house's groans, but because someone was walking in the hall. Slow, deliberate, barefoot. She rose, heart pounding, and stepped out into the hallway. It was empty, but on the floor, right outside her door, was a red comb, identical to the one from her dream. And beneath it, written in ash, were the words, Ni hui lai la. You came back.
Morning in Willow Hollow was not like morning anywhere else. There was no birdsong, no warmth, only a dull gray light that clung to the mist and refused to rise. Liang Shu awoke to the sound of dripping water. At first she thought it came from outside, dew falling from the tiles, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw it. A small puddle beneath her bedside table, and the doll sitting in it. The same lacquered doll with jade eyes. Its silk dress was soaked through, the red fabric darkened to the color of dried blood. She could swear it had been on the shelf last night, but now it sat neatly by her bed, hands folded again, as if nothing had changed. Her breath caught. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and incense, the scent of graves. She carried the doll outside to dry, setting it beneath the eaves. For a moment, the rising mist made it look alive, a tiny figure crouched in prayer. But even as she turned away, she felt it, that same sensation of being watched from somewhere just beyond her sight. In the village square, the fog clung low, curling around the old stones like smoke from an invisible fire. And there, where the earth dipped slightly, stood the stump of the willow tree, the same one from her dream. Its roots still twisted upward from the soil, petrified with age. Charred paper talismans hung from the surrounding fence, some fresh, some yellowed with time. Villagers had left bowls of sticky rice, candles, and small clay balls with hollow eyes, a shrine to something that refused to stay dead. When Shu knelt to touch the blackened bark, her fingertips brushed against something soft, a string of red thread buried halfway in the soil. She pulled gently, and something came loose. A veil, red, tattered, still faintly fragrant with osmanthus, the same flower used in funeral oils. Her heart pounded as she stared at it. The fabric shimmered in the gray light, and for a split second, she thought she saw movement behind it, a shape, a face, a woman standing just beyond the fog, wearing the rest of the veil. Shu froze. The figure didn't move closer. It only stood there, head bowed, veil fluttering gently as though in wind. Then it lifted one hand and pointed toward the manor. When Shu blinked, the bride was gone. Only the veil remained. She brought the fabric home, though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was curiosity, or superstition, or the subtle pull of something she didn't yet understand. Inside the house, she hung it near the window to dry. The sunlight, what little there was, caught the embroidery on its edges, a pattern of intertwined serpents and lotus petals, symbols of union and rebirth. But between the stitches, something else was hidden, faint characters written in old ink. Xie yi bang hun, jia yi shu zhui. Blood binds the soul. Marriage redeems the sin. Her father had never spoken of these things. In truth, he had avoided all talk of the family's past. When she was a child, she asked why no one in the village ever celebrated weddings. He'd only said, "In Willow Hollow, the living should never wear red." Now she understood why. Later that afternoon, the Taoist priest came to call. He was an old man named Master Shen, his robes frayed, but his eyes sharp, like twin needles. His hands were stained with ink and candle soot. He didn't knock. He simply appeared in the doorway, as if the fog had carried him there. "You've returned," he said quietly. His tone was neither kind nor cold, merely inevitable. "I came for my father's funeral," Shu replied, "but the villagers, they look at me as though I've brought a curse." Sen smiled faintly. "Not a curse, Miss Liang. A debt." "What debt?" "The one your bloodline owes." He stepped closer, eyes lingering on the red veil by the window. "You've already seen her, haven't you?" "Who?" "The bride beneath the willow." Shu felt her stomach twist. "You mean that thing in red?" He shook his head slowly. "Not a thing, a promise. Every Liang daughter has one." She stared at him, waiting for him to continue. He didn't. Instead, he reached into his sleeve and produced a paper talisman, yellowed and brittle. It was covered in black ink strokes and sealed with a thumbprint of blood. He pressed it into her hand. "Keep this on your person. It won't stop her from finding you, but it will remind her who you are, the living bride." That night, the wind returned. The windows rattled. The oil lamps flickered until they nearly went out. Shu sat by her father's altar, watching the incense curl upward in trembling ribbons of smoke. The bowl of rice was still there, untouched, yet now, in the dim light, something else had appeared beside it. A red comb, identical to the one from her dream. When she picked it up, strands of black hair clung to its teeth, long, coarse, wet. And when she turned it over, her name was carved in the wood, not Liang Shu, but Liang Bride. The doll on the shelf across the room was facing her again. It had not been there when she sat down. She stood up too quickly, heart pounding, the sound of her pulse loud in her ears. "Who's doing this?" she whispered, voice trembling. The silence answered back, but not empty silence, a breathing kind, a presence just beyond her sight. Then faintly, from somewhere within the house, soft footsteps, not outside, not upstairs, but from beneath, from the sealed door in the basement that her father had always forbidden her to open. By dawn, she was too shaken to sleep. Instead, she wandered back to the willow stump, the veil still folded in her pocket. The morning fog had not lifted. There she found a line of villagers, mostly women, kneeling before the roots. Each held a clay bowl filled with rice wine, murmuring prayers too soft to catch. Master Shen stood behind them, swinging a bundle of burning herbs, muttering words in an ancient dialect. When he saw her, he didn't stop. He only said, "Don't step inside the circle, Miss Liang. This offering is not for you." "What is it for?" "The bride." He tossed a handful of red flower petals into the smoke. The women's voices rose slightly like a low hum. Then one by one, they poured the wine into the earth. The soil drank it greedily, as if it had been waiting. When the ritual ended, one of the women began to cry, quietly, shaking, covering her face. Shen placed a hand on her shoulder. "Another daughter?" he asked. She nodded. 17. She began to dream of him. Shu's breath hitched. "Him?" But the priest didn't answer. That night, Shu dreamed again. The
The willow tree was whole once more, rising against a moon the color of bone. Under its branches stood the same bride, veil fluttering, body swaying in a rhythm that matched the heartbeat pounding in Shu's chest. When Shu tried to speak, her mouth filled with water. The world smelled of lilies and rot. Then the bride spoke, though her lips never moved. "You wear my name." The veil lifted just enough for Shu to see the face beneath. It was her own. Eyes wide, mouth sewn shut with red thread. The last thing she heard before waking was the sound of bells, slow, deliberate, like a wedding procession walking through the fog. She woke gasping, clutching her throat. Her room smelled of incense and damp soil. The doll was gone. In its place sat the veil, freshly pressed, folded neatly beside a small bowl. Inside the bowl, a piece of raw meat, dark red, still warm, and pinned beneath it, a single line written in her father's handwriting. "Do not refuse the offering. The dead do not forgive hunger."
The manor creaked like a ship adrift at sea. Even in daylight it felt submerged, heavy with silence, soaked in memory. Liang Shu walked its narrow halls with a growing sense of unease, as if the house was not welcoming her back, but waiting. The wind had stopped, but the air still moved, subtly, unnaturally, like breath between the walls. She had decided to search the house, not just out of curiosity, but necessity. Too many things were appearing without cause. The comb, the veil, the raw offering, and now the lacquered doll had vanished again. Every object in this house seemed to have its own will. As she stepped into the corridor leading to her father's room, she noticed something odd. The ancestral portraits were different. The eyes, they followed her now. It wasn't just her imagination. She stopped before the largest portrait, her great-grandmother, Liang Yuefang, a woman of sharp cheekbones and colder eyes, seated in full wedding attire. A bride's robe, red, ornate. The legend went that Yuefang had been married at 16, but no one ever said to whom. Shu had never seen her wear white, only red. At the bottom of the frame, something had been scratched into the wood. 她拒绝了婚姻，我们都承受代价. She refused the marriage. We all paid the price. Her father's room was locked. It had always been locked, even when he was alive. But today, the door was ajar. Inside, everything was immaculate. The bed neatly made, drawers closed, dust wiped clean. Except for one thing. In the center of the room, resting atop a prayer mat, sat the missing doll. It faced the east window, hands folded again, veil restored. In its lap lay a bundle of keys tied together with red thread. And beneath it, a folded page torn from her father's journal. Do not open the altar unless you are prepared to bind what escapes. Shu took the keys anyway. They jingled softly in her palm, each one old and iron-worn. Only one had a symbol carved into it, the character Huan, soul. She knew what it unlocked, the altar door. Her father had always forbidden her from going down to the lowest floor, not because of superstition, but because of tradition. The basement had no power, no windows,
and something about it made even the walls feel thinner, as if the house gave way to something deeper beneath the foundation. She lit an oil lantern and descended the steps. The air grew colder with every step. Dust thickened. The scent of burned offerings grew stronger, pungent, bitter, ancient. At the end of the staircase was a wooden door blackened with age. The symbol Feng, sealed, was painted across its surface in dried blood and ash. The key turned slowly. The door resisted, and then opened with a whisper. The altar room was nothing like she expected. It was small, cramped, lined with shelves of old wedding relics, red slippers, dried bouquets, cracked porcelain bowls stained with soot. At the center stood a stone shrine table upon which sat 7 ancestral tablets. Each bore the name of a woman, all of them Liang. Shu lit the lantern and approached the altar. Beneath the table, hidden behind a curtain of rotted silk, was a lacquered coffin, small, child-sized. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. Inside, nestled in a bed of red cloth, was a second doll, almost identical to hers. But this one's eyes were closed, its mouth was sewn shut. Wrapped around its body was a brittle red robe embroidered with a single phrase repeated endlessly, 我愿意嫁, I am willing to marry, I am willing to marry, I am willing, until the words faded into scratches. Something shifted behind her, a breath, a whisper, a step. She turned around. No one. But the door had shut itself. She should have screamed, should have run. Instead, she knelt before the altar, not because she wanted to, because she felt compelled to. The air was heavy, not just with dust, with presence. There were objects on the altar. A bone comb, hair still caught in its teeth, a vial of what looked like menstrual blood, a ring carved from red jade, worn smooth by time. Each item sat on its own tray, not labeled with names, but generations, mother, daughter, daughter's daughter. At the far end of the altar, a bowl of ashes sat undisturbed, and buried halfway inside was a set of tiny human teeth. Shu choked back nausea. These were not symbols. They were offerings, real, specific, and passed down. The Liang women had made these sacrifices for generations, blood, body, silence, in exchange for something. But what? Prosperity? Protection? Or simple survival? She stood to leave, but the door wouldn't open. No matter how hard she pulled, it refused to budge. The shadows pressed in. Then, from behind the altar, she heard it. Laughter. Childlike, soft, mocking. The second doll, the one in the coffin, now sat upright, its sewn mouth split open. No thread, only a gaping grin. Her lantern sputtered, the shadows twisted, and the voice whispered, "Bengshu, you're late for the wedding." When she finally escaped the altar room, smashing the door open with a rusted rod from the corner, daylight had already faded. She climbed the stairs in a daze, every breath trembling, every sound behind her too slow, too deliberate. At the top of the stairs, she collapsed to the ground and saw that the house had changed. The portraits were gone. In their place hung wedding photos, black and white, sepia-toned, each one showing a woman in a red gown, standing beside no one. The other half of the frame was empty. Bride after bride, generation after generation, each married into nothingness. A union with the dead, a pact with the past. Her ancestors had not been wives, they had been sacrifices. That night she did not sleep. She sat by the window, veil in her lap, the doll at her feet, and the keys beside her. The wind carried chanting, faint and rhythmic, from the village square. She knew without looking that the villagers were preparing another ritual, another offering, because something was waking, something hungry, something that remembered just as the house did. And beneath her feet, far beneath the wooden floor and the cracked tiles, she could still hear the echo of that childlike laughter, growing louder.
The next morning came like a warning. The sun rose, but the light was muted, as if the sky itself refused to look directly at Willow Hollow. A strange stillness hung in the air, not quiet, but expectant. Shu hadn't slept. Her skin was cold, her eyes hollow from the hours spent listening to the creaking house whisper its secrets. When the knock finally came, it didn't startle her. She was already waiting by the door. It was Master Shen. This time he didn't wait to be invited in. He stepped past her into the entryway like someone who had walked these floors before, not recently, but long ago. His eyes swept the space, pausing on the lacquered doll by the window, the veil folded on the table, the ashes near the altar. "So," he said softly, "the house has remembered you." Shu didn't answer right away. Her voice had grown brittle. You knew what this house is, what it does." "I knew, but it is not for me to stop. This is your family's contract." She clenched her fists. "What contract?" He turned toward her then, his expression solemn. "The pact made 3 generations ago. When the soil failed, when the rivers turned black, and when your great-grandmother refused her appointed ghost marriage, she broke the old covenant, and so the curse was born." Shu's breath hitched. "Curse?" Sen nodded. "A bloodline curse, passed through the womb. Every Liang daughter is born betrothed, to balance the broken bond, to repay the ancestors, to restore the protection." She staggered back a step. "You're saying I was born into this?" "Before you were born," he said, his voice like a blade wrapped in silk, "you were promised." They sat at the old tea table, where time itself seemed layered in dust. Master Shen brewed from a pouch of dried herbs, bitter and sharp. He poured 2 cups, but drank only from his own. He began, "There are many forms of ghost marriage, some for love, some for duty, some like yours are for atonement." He gestured to the lacquered doll by the window, the veil folded on the table, the ashes near the altar. "That," he said, "is not merely a keepsake, it is a binding vessel, crafted when you were a child. Inside it rests the soul of your intended, a spirit unwed, restless and angry. He is your bridegroom." Shu stared at the doll. It sat with perfect stillness. Its eyes, however, glistened too vividly. "I never agreed to this," she whispered. "But your father did," Shen replied. At that she froze. "He rejected the rites when you were young, burned the scroll, hid the vessel, sent you away to the city in hopes that distance would break the bloodline." Shen lowered his voice. "But pacts like this do not vanish. They wait. They fester." He produced a small scroll from within his robes, parchment yellowed and brittle, sealed with the Liang family crest. "This is the original spirit contract, written by your grandmother. Read it." Her hands trembled as she unfurled the scroll. Ink faded by time, but still legible. "We, the House of Liang, in sorrow and repentance, bind our daughter to the soul of Yu Shen, son of the drowned. May this union protect our land, bind our guilt, and silence the unrest beneath the willow." Beneath it, 5 thumbprints in blood. One bore her name, Liang Shu. "But I was a baby," she whispered. Shen nodded. "They used your blood from your birth cloth." Silence settled like dust. She rose to her feet, unable to breathe. "This is insane!" "No," he said, "this is tradition, an ancient one, older than this village." Shu turned away from him then, trying to calm the fire in her chest, the tremor in her hands. "I won't do it," she said. "I won't marry a ghost." "You already have," Shen said calmly. "The spirit knows. The veil has been accepted. The offerings have begun." She spun on him. "Then tell me how to end it." The Taoist's eyes hardened. "To break the pact is to invite famine and death. Your father tried, and now he is gone. The land is already turning. The trees rot. The villagers grow sick." "So they'll sacrifice me instead?" "Not sacrifice," he said gently. "Fulfillment." Shu walked him out in silence. He paused on the threshold. "One more thing," he said. "The groom, Yu Shen, was not just anyone. He was the son of the water-caller, a drowned boy whose spirit could not rest. Your great-grandmother was meant to marry him and seal the unrest. When she refused, he was buried beneath the willow tree." Her voice was a whisper. "The same one I see in my dreams?" He nodded. "He calls to each young daughter. You saw him once as a child, didn't you?" She did. She remembered it now, vaguely, being 5 years old, tugging at her father's sleeve near the dried riverbed, whispering, "Who is the boy with the wet eyes?" Her father had never answered. He'd simply turned pale. "You have 2 choices," Shen said quietly. "Finish the ceremony, or burn everything." "Burn what?" "The doll, the veil, the scroll. But know this, if you do, the spirit will no longer seek union." "What will he seek?" The priest's voice dropped. "Revenge." That night, the house did not sleep. The walls groaned more loudly than before, like someone or something was walking through them. The temperature dropped, windows frosted, and in every mirror, Shu thought she saw movement just behind her shoulder. She gathered the objects, the doll, the veil, the scroll. She set them in the center of the courtyard and poured oil over them. Her hands shook as she held the match. "Let this end," she whispered. She struck it. The fire flared. The fabric curled. The scroll blackened. The doll cracked. And then a scream, high, shrill, childlike, coming not from the fire, but from under the ground.
from beneath the willow stump. The fire exploded, sending Shu backward. The doll shattered, and inside she saw it, a small, blackened tooth, still wet. Then the flames went out, all of them, even the oil lamp by the altar, even the candles in her room. Darkness swallowed the house, and from the shadows, the sound of water dripping. Then, a wet footstep. The house had swallowed the light. Every lamp, every candle, every flame extinguished. Liang Shu stood barefoot in the courtyard, her hair wild, hands still trembling from the failed fire. The air reeked of burnt silk and something worse, wet earth, copper, something raw. Around her, the objects she had tried to destroy lay broken but not destroyed. The red veil had turned to ash, yet the embroidery remained, untouched by flame. The scroll was blackened but still whole, and the lacquered doll, though split in two, still smiled. Inside it, embedded like a heart, was a single jade stone, green as moss, perfectly smooth, still warm to the touch. And beneath the shards of lacquer, something pulsed. Shu didn't sleep that night. She sat in the ancestral hall, staring at the shattered doll laid out before her like a corpse. She should have felt relief, but what she felt was worse, unfinished, like a wound that refused to close. The jade heart, she couldn't stop looking at it. It didn't feel like a gemstone. It felt like it was watching her. She wrapped it in red cloth and locked it in a drawer. She didn't know why. Some part of her, the part that still remembered childhood lullabies and forbidden corridors, knew better than to throw it away. At dawn, she returned to Master Shen. This time, he was waiting for her. He sat outside the crumbling shrine, beneath the canopy of tattered talismans, sifting through ashes like a man searching for lost time. "You burned it," he said softly. "I tried. And yet, here you are." She unwrapped the cloth and held the jade. It was inside the doll. It was warm. His expression darkened. He took it from her carefully, as if it might bite. "This," he said, "is not just jade. It is soul-bound stone, carved from the burial site of the drowned." He paused. "This is where he lives." Shu swallowed. "You mean the groom?" Shen nodded. "Yu Shen. His essence is embedded in the jade, sealed with rituals lost to even modern Taoists. But the bond, that still lives. The lacquered doll was just the vessel." He looked at her, eyes suddenly glassy. "Did it bleed?" She didn't answer. He knew the truth anyway. Shen led her to the old archives behind the shrine, a crumbling building most villagers avoided. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and mildew, but it held records dating back centuries. Scrolls, birth ledgers, death ledgers, and marriage oaths. Together, they found the original record. Yu Shen, son of Yu Wei, died age 17. Cause of death? Drowning during a midnight offering. His body was never recovered. Beside the record, someone had scribbled in red ink, "Win Bu San, Dai Chu," a soul unscattered, awaiting marriage. Another entry from the same year marked the name Liang Yuefang, but under marital status it said, "Refused. Curse begins." Shen explained in a hushed voice. "Yu Shen was promised to Yuefang, your great-grandmother. He was the only son of the Yu family, a spiritual lineage said to control the waters and keep the river spirits appeased. But Yuefang refused the union. They said she was in love with another." "And so they cursed her?" "She cursed them. The Yu family lost their heir. their river turned black, and your family began losing daughters, not in death, but in life. One by one, each Liang girl was promised to Yu Shen, to bind his soul in red thread and jade. Shu gritted her teeth. You mean fed to him? Shen didn't disagree. That night she returned to the manor. The house creaked as if mourning. The wind had changed. It no longer whistled through the broken beams. Now it whispered. The walls breathed, and the mirrors began to show things they shouldn't. In one reflection, she saw herself walking, though she stood still. In another, she caught sight of a man in ceremonial robes standing behind her, face hidden by a veil, hands soaked in water. But when she turned, she was alone. She couldn't tell if she was being haunted or prepared. In desperation, Shu began searching the hidden parts of the house, places her father had always avoided. Behind an old cabinet, she discovered a small sliding door leading into a crawl space beneath the floorboards. Inside, a box wrapped in red cloth and sealed with wax. She pried it open. Inside were doll fragments. Not one, not two, but 7. Each carved from lacquer, each with a jade heart, each belonging to a Liang daughter. She found a list tucked beneath them, names written in her father's hand. Liang Mei Yun, age 9, vanished. Liang Su Yin, age 17, bride by fire. Liang Fen, age 4, drowned in basin. Liang Shu, age 1, bound by birth. And one final line, if I do not act, she will be the last. The house was not haunted. It was a tomb, a gallery of vessels, a vault of daughters married to a memory that refused to rest. Shu fell to her knees. This was never about tradition. It was devotion weaponized. Love turned to curse. Ritual turned to hunger. And she was to be the final bride. She packed a bag that night. She would leave, even if it meant walking through mist and thorn, through soil that rejected her steps. She would flee the cursed bloodline, the broken vows, the ghost in the jade. But when she opened the door, she stopped. At the gate of the manor stood a wedding altar, built from wood and bone, decorated in rotting flowers, and beneath it stood the bride in red. Her face was no longer veiled. It was Shu's own face, but dead, pale, mouth sewn shut, eyes glassy and wet with river silt. In her hands she held a comb, the same comb Shu had thrown into the fire. The bride tilted her head, not in malice, in invitation. Behind her, a red procession began to form. Dolls, lanterns, shadows, and in the distance, beneath the hollow willow stump, a drum began to beat, slow, measured, like a heartbeat, like a call to the altar.
The manor had always had too many doors. Some led to familiar rooms, the kitchen, the old bathhouse, the prayer hall. Others led nowhere, bricked shut, sealed with paper talismans, or so warped with time they refused to open. But there was one Shu had never dared open, and now it opened for her. At the end of the corridor behind her father's altar, where the air was thickest and the shadows gathered like mourners, a panel in the wall slid open with a whisper. No breeze, no creak, just invitation. Behind it, a narrow stone staircase descending deep into the earth. She lit a lantern. The flame trembled. The steps were slick with moss. The air changed the deeper she went, colder, wetter, and laced with the scent of myrrh and rot. It wasn't just a cellar.
It was a burial ground. As she reached the bottom, the light revealed a long corridor lined with red curtains, faded to rust and stitched shut with black thread, each one marked with a name, each with the symbol for bride, Ja. She pulled one curtain aside, slowly. Behind it sat a body, perfectly still, a woman, wearing full red bridal attire, face powdered white, lips painted crimson, hands folded over her lap as if waiting for a groom to arrive. Only she never would, because her eyes had been sewn shut and her mouth stitched with the same thread that held the veil in place. Shu stumbled back. The woman's skin had dried like paper. Her fingers still clutched an old comb. A jade ring clung to her skeletal hand, glinting in the lantern's light. She was not buried. She had been displayed. Curtain after curtain, bride after bride, 7 in total. Each a Liang daughter. Each sacrificed, not in death, but in ritual stillness, preserved, trapped, silenced. In the final alcove, there was no curtain, just a mirror, tall, framed in black lacquer, cracked in the corner. Shu approached it slowly, unsure what she would see. Her reflection wavered in the lantern light, but beside it, not in the mirror, but in the crypt, stood another. A bride, face veiled, body turned slightly toward her. Shu spun around. The space was empty. She turned back, and the reflection was still there. Now the veiled figure stood directly behind her reflection, hands outstretched. Shu screamed and smashed the mirror with her lantern. It shattered. The flame died. Darkness swallowed the room. And from every curtain there came a tugging sound. Thread pulling free, one by one, soft, measured, eyes opening. She ran. Her breath caught in her throat as she scrambled up the stone stairs, clawing her way toward the light. Behind her, the soft shuffle of cloth, a dragging footstep, the sound of combs scratching through dry hair. She burst into the ancestral hall and slammed the secret door shut. But silence did not follow. From beneath the floorboards came a low hum, not malevolent, but mournful, like the voices of brides calling through stitched lips. Later, still shaking, Shu confronted Master Shen again. "You said they were vessels, but they weren't. They were alive when they were placed there, weren't they?" The priest's eyes held no denial. They were living offerings, prepared, preserved, left in stillness so that the spirit could come and go as he pleased, as groom, as guest, as ghost. They were buried alive. They were bound, fed opium, sealed with thread, and offered beneath the moon on the ghost festival. And my father let this happen? Shen looked away. Your father tried to end it, but he was too late. The pact was already sealed when your mother carried you. The curse passed to your name the moment you were born. That's why the others had to remain, to contain the rage that would have consumed you. Shu staggered backward, bile rising in her throat. All those women, they died to protect me? No, Shen said. They died to protect the pact. That night, the wind returned. Only now, it came from beneath the floorboards, cold, fetid wind, like breath pulled through graves. Shu sat in her room, clutching the jade heart, listening. The walls groaned, the floorboards shifted, and the sound of thread snapping echoed from deep below. Then, a voice. Faint, raspy, female. You must finish what we could not. She stood. Outside her room, the corridor stretched unnaturally long, every shadow deeper than the last. A red veil fluttered from the ceiling, suspended by invisible thread, and beneath it, a mirror, whole again. On its surface, written in condensation, "You must say yes, or we will never rest." At dawn, the villagers gathered. For the first time, they met her eyes. Some bowed, some cried, and one, an old woman with white hair and no teeth, pressed something into Shu's hands. A small wooden box. Inside, a folded red robe, tailored to her exact size. And at the bottom, a single note. He waits beneath the willow.
The sky bled gray, not from clouds, but from a thick, colorless mist that seemed to rise out of the soil itself. It clung to the village like a damp shroud, muting all color, flattening all sound. No birds, no wind, no breath, only stillness. She opened her eyes to the scent of rot. It wasn't coming from the house this time. It was coming from the world outside. She stepped into the courtyard. The earth had changed. The soil, once packed and firm, had turned soft and wet, as if the land had begun to weep from its core. Her footsteps sank with a sickening squelch. The grass had blackened overnight, not dry, not withered, but oozing, as if something beneath had bled upward. The garden was dead. The peach tree, once her father's pride, stood barren, bark split, its branches curled like claws. At the village edge, rows of rice paddies had turned to sludge. And worse, the animals. She passed a coop where chickens lay motionless, eyes open, tongues swollen. At the neighboring home, she saw a farmer huddled over the body of a calf, still steaming from death, flies gathered in thick swarms. The man did not look up. He only whispered. She refused. In the square, the elders were gathered. This time they didn't avoid her. They stared at her, not with hatred, but with something colder, expectation. Master Shen stood among them, robes damp from the creeping fog. His face was drawn, pale, older somehow. "You've seen what's begun," he said. She nodded slowly. "The land is rotting. Because the pact was broken. You burned the vessel. You delayed the ritual. The spirit is hungry." A villager stepped forward, a woman with shaking hands and eyes red from reaping. "My daughter," she whispered, "she was pregnant. Last night she woke screaming, and when the midwife came, there was only blood. No baby, just the cord, tied in a red knot." Another man shouted, "My son hasn't spoken since dawn. He only sits at the window, combing his hair. We don't even have a comb in the house." She tried to speak, but no words came. These weren't accidents. These were warnings. Master Shen stepped toward her, voice low and grim. "You were meant to be the last, the one to close the circle, to satisfy what your ancestors refused. But now," he looked toward the mist-shrouded stump of the willow tree, "he is waking."
Back at the manor, the air had changed. The walls were sweating. The altar had cracked down the middle. She stood before the mirror in her father's old room, the only one she hadn't smashed. She stared at her reflection, but it wasn't quite her. The face in the glass wore a red wedding robe. Her eyes were hollow like dried riverbeds. Her mouth was painted in thick crimson, not lipstick, but blood. And when she lifted her hand to the mirror, the reflection did not move. Instead, it leaned forward and whispered, "He is no longer waiting." That night, the dreams were worse. She stood in the square, surrounded by villagers in red robes. They were silent, unmoving. In front of her stood the willow, whole again, massive, alive. But its branches bore no leaves, only ropes, dozens of them, tied into bridle knots, and hanging from each rope, a bride, her face over and over and over. Then the tree split open at the trunk, and from its hollow heart crawled a figure drenched in river water, flesh mottled with algae and decay. A red veil dripped from his shoulders. He extended a hand to her, and in his other hand he held a lantern made from bone. She woke with a scream stuck in her throat. The manor was humming, not with sound, but with vibration, a slow, pulsing rhythm like a heartbeat beneath her feet. The floor was wet, not from rain, from something beneath. She followed the sound to the kitchen, and there on the table sat a bowl. Inside, a newborn animal, a goat maybe, or part of one, but it wasn't whole. Its body was curled, skin translucent, veins still twitching, and stitched across its belly was a red thread. She dropped the bowl and ran outside. The villagers had gathered again, this time with lanterns, talismans, and ropes of salt. They surrounded the willow stump. Some were praying, others weeping. One man, the old coffin maker, was hammering a small box shut. Inside it, something scratched. Master Shen turned to her. "We are losing control. The pact was protection. You were its seal. Now the spirit is no longer bound by invitation." She stared at him. "So what happens now?" He didn't answer. He only stepped aside and pointed to the stump. The earth around it had cracked open, and from within the split roots had emerged a single red hand, pale, thin, dripping, fingernails black with river silt, reaching toward the village. By dawn the fog had not lifted. The square was empty, the homes shuttered, the offerings replaced with knives and charms. The villagers were preparing not for marriage, but for siege. And in the manor, she could no longer step without water rising around her ankles. The altar room was submerged, the portraits were melting, and in her bedroom, the doll had returned, whole again, smiling, this time holding a tiny, beating heart of jade.
The house had begun to breathe. It exhaled cold air from the floorboards, sighed through the cracks in the walls, and whispered from beneath doorframes. Sue barely noticed anymore, because now she wasn't alone. They had begun appearing after the second night without sleep. First, it was in the corner of her vision, a shadow too short to be a grown person, too still to be wind. Then the sound of soft footsteps, barefoot, hesitant, childlike, padding through the hall just after midnight. But it wasn't until she found the tiny handprint on her bedroom mirror that she began to understand. These were not the ancestors. These were the unborn. It started with the crying. Not loud, not piercing, just soft, as though from beneath water. She searched the entire house, attic to basement, following the sound like a lullaby sung in reverse. When she reached the prayer room, the crying stopped. But in its place, she found something else. A small wooden cradle, rotted with age. Inside, a swaddle of red cloth, curled tightly, empty, but warm. She stepped closer. A whisper curled through the air. "Mama?" The village had grown quieter and somehow colder. The fog no longer moved. It watched. Sue walked through it as if underwater. Her clothes never dried. Her hands remained pale and damp, no matter how close she sat to the fire. And every morning she woke to toys laid out on the steps of the manor. Handmade, worn. A rabbit with no eyes. A spinning top carved from bone. A red string tied into a noose. She tried to return them. No one claimed them. No one would even touch them. Master Shen came to her again. This time he didn't sit. He stayed near the doorway, unwilling to step inside. "They've begun to gather," he said. "The ones who were never named." Sue said nothing. He continued, voice lower now. "The spirit of Yu Xin was never just a groom. His rage spilled beyond the pact. Every girl who refused, every ritual left unfinished, every soul that was never properly buried." He paused. "They've clung to him. They live within him. They are him now." Sue turned to him, hollow-eyed. "Children?" He nodded. "The offspring that never were, spirits of lineage disrupted, some from miscarriages, some from forbidden pregnancies lost in secret. Others were taken before they could be born at all." Sue's throat tightened. "Why are they coming to me?" Shen finally met her gaze. "Because you are the last mother, the one who was promised, the one they were meant to be born through." That night, Sue didn't dream. She remembered. She remembered being 9 years old, falling ill after a fever, and waking to the sound of humming from beneath her bed. A song she'd never heard before, but one she somehow knew the words to. She remembered bleeding without cause at 11. The doctor had said it was stress. She remembered the first time she ever held her childhood doll and how her fingers trembled before she even knew what fear was. And now the doll was sitting in her bed again. Its lap cradled a clay figure the size of a baby bird. Its face was hers, but twisted. The mouth, like the bride's before her, was stitched shut. Sue screamed. She threw the doll into the fireplace, but it did not burn. The flames turned blue, then vanished. The hearth filled with river water, and from within the coals something small and wet crawled out. A hand, tiny, boneless. It dragged itself across the stone like a worm. Behind her, the mirror fogged again. Words appeared in streaks. "You left us in the dark." She fled. Out of the house, into the mist, toward the shrine, toward anything. But the shrine was no sanctuary. The offering table had been overturned. The ancestral scrolls were soaked, and in their place dozens of tiny shoes, infant-sized, each one tied with red thread. Master Shen appeared from the shadows. His face was white with fear. "They've crossed over," he said. "Not just the unborn, the ones who were buried without name, the ones who were fed to the pact without consent. They've been unsealed." Su's voice cracked. "How do I stop this?" "You cannot." "Then what do they want?" He hesitated. "To be seen, to be named, to be mourned." Su collapsed to her knees. "I don't know their names." Shen looked toward the sky, which had turned the color of ash. "Then give them yours." Back at the manor, the walls wept. The floorboards pulsed like skin. And in the mirror, all the mirrors, were children. Dozens of them, standing still, watching, dressed in red. Some were barely toddlers, some had no faces. One floated above the bed, arms outstretched, and they spoke with one voice. "Mama." Su lit incense. She placed offerings on the ground, rice, sweet water, candles. And then, with trembling fingers, she wrote her name on a slip of red paper and whispered, "This name was never meant to be mine. I give it to you, all of you. Take it, share it, be born through it if you must, but let me speak, let me breathe." The flame flickered, and for the first time in days, the fog thinned. Outside, a child's laughter echoed through the trees. Not mocking, not angry, just fading. But peace never stays in Willow Hollow. The next morning, the earth cracked open beneath the willow stump, and from it rose a figure made of bones, thread, and ash. Its chest bore a jade heart. Its arms were stitched from dozens of limbs, and behind it, the shadows of children gathered again. Only now, they had teeth.
They dressed the altar in silence. Red silks, frayed at the edges. Osmanthus petals, wilted but fragrant. Candles made from tallow and bone, flickering with unnatural steadiness. A porcelain bowl, freshly filled with pig's blood. Another with salt. Another with rice wine sweetened with lotus root. The villagers had gathered long before dawn. No bell was rung, no announcement made, but every step, every movement felt rehearsed, as if this ritual had lived in their bones for generations, because it had. Shu woke to the sound of water being poured outside her window. She rose, slowly now, warily, and moved toward the light. Below her, in the courtyard of her family's home, they were preparing a wedding, but not hers, not anymore. This was something else. She saw Master Shen among them, his robes damp with mist, his eyes heavy, and in his hands a small wooden effigy, roughly carved, dressed in red. Its face was blank. It wore a lock of her hair. Shu confronted them, barefoot, breath still shaking from the nightmares. "What are you doing?" Shen didn't turn. "Saving the village," She stepped forward. "With what?" "With you," another elder whispered, "or what remains of you." They had taken it all. Her blood, from the sheets she'd left after the first nosebleed. Her hair, from the comb in the prayer room. Her breath, captured in a mirror fogged by incense. And her name, already burned in a scroll. "You refused the living ritual," Shen said. "So now we offer the essence." He turned. "Not a bride, a feast." They placed the effigy at the altar beneath the willow stump. The roots had split wide now, forming a mouth, a thirst. Shu tried to stop them, but every step she took forward, the fog thickened, the wind rose, though no leaves moved, and the villagers were no longer entirely human. Their eyes were glazed, their mouths moved in prayer, but their voices came from somewhere else, like they were being puppeted, possessed, rehearsing the words of those long dead. The ghost wedding began at dusk. They lit red lanterns and floated them down the dry riverbed. Children scattered lotus seeds and recited the names of the 7 forgotten brides. The women circled the stump, singing in cracked voices, weaving red thread between their fingers, loop after loop after loop. And when the final verse ended, he came. The wind stopped, the fire dimmed, and the earth exhaled steam. From the mouth of the willow's roots a figure began to rise, tall, thin, draped in red silk that moved like mist. Its head was bowed, its hands hung lifelessly, but its presence crushed the air. The spirit groom had arrived. Shu could not move, not because she was held back, but because every part of her remembered him, from the dreams, from the mirror, from the blood in her bones. He was made of sorrow and water, from bones never claimed, from anger that had fermented into something colder than hatred. And he was hungry. But he did not look at the effigy. He looked at her, directly, clearly, as if the ritual meant nothing, as if he had come not to wed, but to collect. Shu tried to speak, to offer something, anything, but her throat closed. And then he stepped forward. The villagers knelt, faces to the soil. The spirit walked past the altar, past the bride doll, past Shen, and stopped in front of her. For a long time he said nothing. Then, without lifting his head, he whispered, "You were promised, but now I choose." And in his voice she heard all of them: the drowned, the unborn, the buried, the forgotten, a chorus of sorrow. Then he reached out and placed something in her hand. It was cold, a ring, jade, still slick with water, still pulsing. She fell to her knees, not from fear, but from weight, the weight of expectation, of betrayal, of a promise made before she was born. The villagers rose behind her, eyes empty, faces slack. The spirit turned away from her and vanished into the willow. But the fog remained, and the altar smiled, because the ritual had been accepted, not completed, not fulfilled, but welcomed, and that was enough to open the door. That night, the soil grew colder. The crops that had begun to rot turned black. The wells ran dry, the river reversed, and in each corner of every home A red thread began to grow, sprouting from the walls like fungus, creeping, twining, binding. One villager found his wife brushing her hair at midnight with a bone comb she didn't own. Another found a baby in their crib, but they had no child, and every mirror showed someone else's face. The feast had begun. In the manor, Shu sat alone. The ring would not come off. It had fused to her skin. And in the silence of the house, the mirrors flickered with red, each one showing a bridal chamber, each one showing a groom waiting at the end of the bed, but never hers. He had chosen her, but not for marriage. He had other plans.
The storm came without warning. Not thunder, not rain, but a sound, deep, resonant, hollow, like a drum struck beneath the earth. Each beat shook the floorboards. Each pause felt like a breath held too long. And with every pulse, the past came closer, as if the blood in her veins had begun to rewind. Jiyu lit the final lantern. Its flame hissed, reluctant, as though it knew what she was about to uncover. She had found the journal tucked behind her father's altar, bound in cracked leather and sealed with wax. Its cover was unmarked, its pages brittle with age. But inside, her great-grandmother's voice lived on. Liang Yu Fang. I was 16 when they told me I would wed a boy I'd never met. They said he had drowned, but his soul remained unbound, and if I wore the red veil and welcomed him, our land would thrive, our family would be honored. I refused. I loved someone else, a fisherman's son, mortal, alive, real. So I burned the scroll, I buried the doll, I bled into the river and swore I would carry no one's ghost. That same night, the rice spoiled in the fields. My sisters grew pale, the well ran black. And my first child was born silent. The villagers cursed me, said I had broken the balance. So I sewed my mouth shut in ritual as they demanded. I offered my womb, and I gave them a second daughter to replace the first. But it was too late. The pact had mutated. Yu Shen's soul was no longer a groom. It had become something else, a hunger. And now, every daughter after me is born already bound. Jiyu read the final line 3 times. There is no escaping a promise made in blood, only delay, only descent. She closed the journal with trembling hands. The walls of the manor seemed to pulse again, in time with the same subterranean drumbeat. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't rain, it was summoning, a pull from beneath the roots. She ran to the crypt. She didn't know why, only that something inside her had awakened, not memory, not instinct, something older. The curtains were open now. The brides were standing. 7 figures, veiled, still, silent, but no longer dead. They had been waiting, not for release, not for revenge, for recognition. Each one turned to face her, and in unison they lifted their veils. Jiyu gasped. They weren't strangers. They were herself. Versions, echoes, reflections. Different ages, different robes, but the same eyes, the same bloodline. each a descendant of Liang Yufang, each one who had worn the thread and veil, willingly or not. And one by one they spoke. "We were born for him. We died for him. You must choose what we could not." She fled, not in terror, in clarity. She understood now. Her family's power, their survival, had always been bought with silence, pain, and repetition. Yu Shen had become their god, their curse, their groom, priest, and executioner. Each generation was not merely haunted, they were harvested. Bound before birth, named before speech, offered before choice. She returned to her father's study, tore apart the altar. Behind it, hidden beneath a loose plank, she found a second journal, this one in her father's hand. "I loved her too much to let them take her, so I made a second vessel, one of salt and bone, and fed it blood until it stirred. I told the villagers I had honored the pact, that the spirit was pleased, but I lied. I buried the doll, I changed the rituals, I gave her a name without red thread. But it didn't matter. On the night her mother died giving birth, I heard the willow weep. And when Jiyu turned 1, she began to sing in a tongue I didn't teach her. She was already his." She folded the journal and placed it into the fire. It did not burn. Instead, the flames curled inward, and from the center rose the shape of a bride, tiny, flickering. And then she screamed, the sound of every woman before her woven into one endless cry. The villagers gathered at her doorstep that night. They said nothing. Each held an item, a bowl of rice, a lock of hair, a bone comb, a candle. They placed them in a circle around her door. Then they sealed it with red paint. The door would not open again. Inside, the air grew thin, the shadows longer, and in her reflection, a veil began to form, even without her touching it. In the mirror she saw them again, the brides, the unborn, her father, her mother, and behind them all, Yu Shen. His face was no longer hidden. He was young, beautiful, and utterly empty. Not cruel, not kind, just consuming. He raised his hand, and with a voice like a river breaking through earth, he said, "This is your inheritance." The door would not open. No matter how hard she pushed, pulled, screamed, begged, the door remained sealed. Not by nails, not by chains, but by consent. By the villagers' quiet, shared agreement that she must not leave and he must be fed. So Shu stopped fighting. She sat and listened. The house was no longer quiet. It had begun to speak. Voices moved through the halls, not loud, but constant. Echoes of arguments long past, laughter that curdled into sobs, songs sung off-key by children who never aged. But clearest of all was her father's voice, and he was speaking to her mother. She found the cassette recorder buried inside a drawer, dust-covered, rusted, but intact. When she pressed play, the tape stuttered, then hissed, then played. I told you, Lin, we don't have to follow it anymore. We can leave. We can go to the city. Let them cling to the ghosts. We'll build something new. A pause. But she's already marked, John. Another voice. Softer. Sadder. Her mother. She's his. Silence. Then, I'll buy her freedom. She rewound it, played it again. I'll buy her freedom. Those 4 words stuck in her chest like pins. She tore through the rest of the drawer. Underneath stacks of incense paper and joss coin envelopes, she found a small wooden lockbox cracked down the side. Inside, a contract stamped with village seals, a red envelope never opened, a thin cord of hair tied with black string, and a photograph. She froze. The photo showed a child, herself, in the arms of her father. But standing just behind them, barely visible through the mist, was a figure in red. Not a person, not even a shadow, a shape, a presence, watching, even then. She read the contract. The ink was smeared in places, but the words were legible. On the condition of relocation, external education, and complete severance from ritual obligations, the Long family agrees to relinquish spiritual guardianship in exchange for silence. In compensation, jade seal, heirloom doll, and name of child shall remain buried. In breach, retribution shall return 7-fold. At the bottom, her father's signature, and beside it, a thumbprint pressed in red. Hers, tiny, from infancy. She turned to the envelope. Inside was 70,000 yuan in crisp notes. The bride price. Blood money. He had tried to buy her future. Not through magic, not through power, but through paper. Through man's law. Against the other law, the one that could not be undone with money. She stepped into the hall. The portraits of her ancestors had changed. Each one now faced the wall, turned away. All but one, her father. He looked down at her with eyes full of regret and something worse, fear. She returned to the tape recorder, rewound, pressed play. Her mother's voice again. If you bury it, it will rise. If you burn it, it will scream. If you run, he will follow, through wind, through water, through womb. And her father's reply. Then I lie for her, and I'll lie to him, and when he comes, I'll say I never had a daughter. The tape snapped. Outside, the earth groaned. Beneath the floorboards, water began to bubble, cold, black, rising. And on the walls, red ink began to bloom, words written in ancient hand. A promise broken is a debt renewed. A name denied is a mouth unsown. The groom does not forget. She lit incense, sat in the center of the room, and whispered, "Father, what did you give him in my place?" No answer. But the fire dimmed, and in the shadows, a figure stepped forward. Not Yu Shen, not a ghost, but her father. His eyes were hollow,
his mouth sewn shut, and in his hand he held a broken mirror. He knelt before her, held it up, and in the reflection she saw a cradle, a baby, a thread of red tied to its ankle, floating in the river, eyes open, watching, smiling. She woke on the floor. The mirror was gone. Only the broken thread remained, wrapped around her wrist, tight, warm, pulsing. And from the window she saw the villagers preparing again. Not a ritual, not a feast, but a funeral. But no one had died yet. No one living.
The funeral bell rang once, but no name was spoken, no incense burned, no casket carried. It was a rite for the unclaimed, for those whose names were never written, for those who never breathed and yet were never allowed to leave. Shu stood behind the shuttered window, the red thread still wrapped around her wrist, tighter now, slick with sweat, pulsing in rhythm with something far older than a heartbeat. She no longer asked if she was awake or dreaming, because in Willow Hollow there was no longer a difference. At dusk, the fog thickened, but this time it didn't creep. It pushed, swallowed the homes, choked the trees, climbed the walls, and when it reached the manor, it knocked, not with fists, but with laughter, childlike. Dozens of voices all giggling, whispering, humming. Then a voice at the door. "Mama, we're cold." She backed away. "You're not mine." Another voice, older now, sadder. "But you were supposed to be." The mirror fogged, condensation streaked like tears. A small handprint appeared, then another, then 20. The door creaked open by itself. No wind, no weight, only a smell. Wet earth, mold, amniotic fluid. And from the darkness outside, they entered. They didn't crawl, they floated. Small bodies, translucent skin, some fully formed, others missing limbs, faces, spines. Some wept, some smiled, some stared. One wore a wedding veil. One carried a comb too large for her hand. One dragged a broken mirror behind her like a toy. And all of them whispered, "Finish what was promised." Shu stumbled backward. Her heel struck something soft. She turned. A cradle. Not hers, not anyone's. Inside a red swaddle. Still, silent, but dripping. She opened it. Nothing inside but teeth. Baby teeth. Dozens, still growing. They began to rattle, then chatter, then scream. She ran through the halls of her family home, where every door opened into the same room, the bridal chamber, the altar, the cradle, over and over again. Time looped, space collapsed. She ran through one doorway and emerged into the crypt, the bride staring, mouths unsewn. She ran again and emerged into the field, barren, salted, crawling with worms shaped like fingers. She ran again and emerged into the square, now filled with tiny coffins stacked to the sky, each one marked with her name, Liang Shu, Liang Shu, Liang Shu.
over and over and over. The children followed, but not to harm, to return. They reached for her wrists, her belly, her eyes. They whispered through her skin. "We would have been yours. You would have held us. You were our doorway, and now we have nowhere to go." She collapsed, fell to her knees, and for the first time, she surrendered. "I didn't choose this," she sobbed. A pause, then one whisper, so soft it sounded like her own voice. "You carry it all the same." Then they vanished, all of them, at once. No sound, no breath, no goodbye. Only silence, and the thread on her wrist unraveled. She opened her eyes. She was back in the manor, alone. The mirror before her was clear, but in its reflection, Yu Shen stood behind her.
The ghost festival began without fire. No lanterns, no drums, no prayers, only silence, and the color red. Red on every door frame, red tied to every tree, red ash drifting through the air like soft, falling blood. In Willow Hollow, the dead no longer waited. They walked. Shu stood before the mirror, unmoving. Her breath no longer fogged the glass. Her heartbeat no longer reached her ears. Her reflection wore a bridal robe. Not illusion, not ghost. Real. Red silk flowed over her shoulders, stitched in golden thread. Dragons, lotuses, serpents devouring their own tails. Her lips were painted, her cheeks powdered white, and on her head a crown of willow branches soaked in ink. She did not remember dressing. She only remembered waking and whispering a name that was not hers. The villagers gathered beneath the willow stump. It had split open fully now, a gaping wound in the land. From its hollow rose mist and moths, thousands of them, all blood-red, swirling like a veil caught in the wind. Master Shen knelt before the opening, drawing symbols in salt and ash. Around him, the others formed a ring, each holding a candle carved from ancestral bone. They chanted low, ancient words that had not been spoken aloud in decades. Above them, the sky bled rain, but it was not water. It stained the soil. It burned the skin. And still, she came. Shu descended the hill with no memory of her steps. The bridal robe dragged behind her, but never touched the ground. The jade ring pulsed on her finger. Her eyes were no longer hers, and her mouth, now painted shut, began to crack. From beneath the red pigment, black stitches rose, woven in and out of her lips. She opened them anyway, and when she spoke, the voice was not her own. "You buried me beneath the tree." Master Shen stepped forward. He did not raise his hand. He did not beg. He only said, "Yu Fang, forgive." But the bride smiled. Forgiveness was never part of the pact. The exorcism began. The villagers placed 7 coffins in a circle, each holding the bones of a previous bride. They chanted the names. Each time a name was spoken, the air cracked like thunder.
The willow moaned, and the veil upon Shu's face began to unravel thread by thread. She screamed. The voice that tore from her mouth echoed with two layers, Shu's sorrow and the bride's wrath. Shen reached into his robe and pulled out the final talisman, dipped it in his own blood, pressed it to her forehead. Silence. Shu collapsed. Her body hit the earth with a sound like drowned bells. The wind stopped. The moths scattered, and the willow tree began to bloom for the first time in 50 years. Red flowers opening like mouths, dripping teeth instead of pollen. But the silence didn't last. From beneath the roots came a new sound. Footsteps. Not many, just one. Heavy, wet, dragging chains behind it. Yu Shen emerged, not a ghost, not a man, but what remained. His face was the same, young, serene, handsome. But where his chest had once been, there was only a hole, pulsing, bleeding river water, each heartbeat releasing a child's scream. His hands were sewn together with red cord, his eyes were jade, and his mouth smiled. He stepped over Shu's body. The villagers fell to their knees. He did not see them. He saw only the bride, still inside her, still awake. And with a voice that cracked the soil, he said, "I have come to collect." Master Shen wept. He tore open his robes, revealing the brand carved into his chest, the same seal used on the original pact scroll. He said, "I offer myself." Yu Shen tilted his head. "You were never promised." He raised his hand. The wind screamed, and Shen's body withered to dust. Shu awoke. She stood again, not from her own will. The red bride now fully filled her. She looked at Yu Shen, not with fear, but longing. She stepped into his arms, and for one moment the sky stopped bleeding, the earth held its breath, and the veil returned to her face by itself. Then they both turned to the villagers, and the bride spoke once more. "You sealed me in silence. Now I will sing until every root hears me." The earth opened, the altar cracked, and from beneath the village they came. All of them. The unborn, the drowned, the veiled, the forgotten, the brides with no grooms, the children with no names, the mothers with no mouths. They rose, not as spirits, but as witnesses. And Willow Hollow wept, because the wedding was not the end, it was the beginning.
The dawn never came. The sky hung between two colors, the deep blue of night and the gray of ash. Time refused to move. The wind refused to breathe. And beneath the old willow, the world waited. The villagers were gone, not vanished, not fled, simply gone. Their lanterns still burned in empty hands. Their shadows still walked across walls that no longer stood. Their voices echoed through the fields, but no mouths spoke them. All that remained was the sound, the hum of the willow roots, the song of something buried, now awake. At the heart of it all stood Chu, or what was left of her. She no longer wore the red robe. It had become part of her,
stitched into her skin, pulsing with veins of light that flickered beneath the fabric. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting both fire and water. She breathed, but not for herself. Each breath pulled the mist closer. Each exhale fed it back to the ground. The bride was no longer inside her, nor was she possessed. They had merged. Yushan knelt before her, one knee pressed into the soil. His body was breaking, bones collapsing inward like wet paper. His voice, when he spoke, was faint. "The pact is complete." But Shu only looked at him. There was no hatred, no love, only the hollow calm of something that had outlived meaning. "The pact was never yours to make," she whispered. He tilted his head, eyes clouding with river mist. "It was yours to finish." The ground trembled. Cracks spread across the stump of the willow, spiraling outward like veins. From each fissure poured water, dark, viscous, shining faintly red. The voices of the unborn filled the air again, not screaming this time, but singing, low, gentle, sorrowful. The song of mothers who never held, of daughters who never lived long enough to disobey. Chu raised her hand, and the song changed. The children fell silent. The willow began to grow, not up, but inward. Its roots pulled deep, wrapping around bones, foundations, memories. It drank the offerings, the blood, the silence. It drank everything. The earth swallowed the houses whole, the shrines caved in, the altars crumbled, and the village, all of Willow Hollow, sank. The air filled with the scent of soil and iron, the sound of bells, faint, fading, then gone. At the center of the sinking land, Chu stood over Yushan. His body had turned to ash. Only his eyes remained, two pale jade stones resting in the dirt. She picked them up. For a long moment she held them in her palm, as if weighing something invisible. Then she whispered, "No one belongs to you anymore." She placed the jade into the hollow of the willow's trunk. The tree shuddered, its roots twisted, and then it went still. The mist began to thin, not disperse, just lighten. Sunlight touched the edges of the ruined valley for the first time in generations, and in that faint light, the willow gleamed gold for a heartbeat, then faded back to gray. Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that feels clean. The kind that feels like the world is holding its breath between heartbeats. Seasons passed. The river found its course again, curling around the hollow like a serpent guarding its egg. Grass grew over the ruins. No road led there anymore. Only one traveler every generation ever found it, always by dusk, and always drawn by the same thing, a red flower blooming where nothing else should grow. Inside the willow's hollow, something stirred, not a spirit, not a ghost, a child, sleeping, wrapped in red silk, skin pale, perfect, still breathing. Her name carved into the bark beside her read Liang Shu. And so the cycle continued, not cursed, not broken, just rewritten, in roots, in blood, in silence. Because some promises do not end in death, they end in inheritance. And in Willow Hollow, inheritance is just another word for haunting. The wind returned that night, gentle, cool, almost kind. It moved through the fields where the village once stood, carrying whispers that sounded like prayers or warnings. If you listened closely, you could almost hear the echo of a voice long gone, soft and clear, saying, "The hollow never lets go."